is divided, despite all of the technology we have that keeps us connected. However, there is a way to combat this division, and that's learning more languages. Because the more languages that you learn, the more people you interact with. And the more people you interact with, the more cultures you interact with, which ultimately leads to less confusion. Lucky for us, there are plenty of ways to learn a new language today, whether that's downloading an app on your phone, going online, or taking a class. So let's all imagine that we're doing just that. We're on this journey together. So the first couple things one would learn is maybe how to count to 10, maybe some numbers. And then you would progress from there. But let's start out by talking about my family. So I am the youngest of 4 children, family of 6. And I love my family. They were super supportive when I'm learning Spanish. They even let me teach them some things. But they're monolingual. We only speak English in my house. So for the longest time, I thought I was only destined to know English. Like, my family doesn't know it, why should I know it? So if you're coming here today with that same idea that, well, I only speak this language at home, why would I ever be able to speak another one? Forget that idea. You can do it. So that leads me to my first story. I am a rehabilitation technician at a rehab center not too far from here, and I typically help patients who have suffered from brain injury, whether that's traumatic brain injury or suffering from something like a stroke. So one day I was in the physical therapy gym with a patient who was wheelchair bound. So the patient and I are in the physical therapy gym, and she has a gait belt around her waist, which is just like a little belt, so I have something to hold on to. And we're about to practice sit to stands. So especially for wheelchair-bound patients, this is super important. So they're going from a seated position to a standing position, and they have to practice it a lot in order for them to progress to start walking. So my job was the easy part. All I had to do was cue her, count to 3, and hold on to her when she decided to stand up. So I look at the patient, I'm grabbing onto her, and I say, 1, 2, 3, and I'm pulling up, and she just sits there. She's not moving, she just has this blank stare, and I was like, well, dang, maybe she didn't hear me. So I looked at her again, and I grabbed onto her, and I said, 1, 2, 3, and I'm pulling up, and she's just sitting there. And I was thinking, wow, okay, oh yeah, her chart. So her chart says that the patient speaks both English and Spanish. But maybe because of her stroke, it interfered with her ability to interpret English. So I had a new idea. I looked at the patient, and I grabbed onto her, and I said, 1, 2, 3, and she stood straight up. She knew exactly what to do because I was speaking her language. So that moment didn't take a lot of work to learn how to say 1, 2, 3 in Spanish, but it did take a lot of courage. A lot of courage because it was my first time using Spanish in a professional setting. So I was later reflecting on this event, and I thought, I only learned numbers, and I was able to help somebody a little bit. What if I learned some more? So I started learning sentence structure. I was able to conjugate the verbs to make a complete sentence. So then I was keeping my eyes out to maybe be able to help someone else, because that little bit of helping the woman at the rehab center was motivating me to learn even more. So after I learned sentence structure, I was keeping my eye out for a new opportunity to practice. So that leads me to my next story. Last year, I was an intern at a hospital. So I was following around all these different medical professionals to see what type of job I want to do when I grow up. So one day, I was following around a respiratory therapist and a nurse, and we were going into a patient's room who had just come out of a coma. So they were coming out of sedation, and the patient was really confused, and we needed to take him off of the ventilator because he was breathing on his own. The problem was the patient didn't speak English, and the staff didn't speak Spanish. And my heart was pounding. I was like, this is it. This is where I get to use it. So I grabbed onto some courage somewhere, and I said, I can speak Spanish. And the respiratory therapist, the nurse just kind of looked at me, and they're like, really? And I said, yeah, and what do we need to tell him? So they were telling me, we need to tell him what we're going to do. We're going to take out this tube. And I was like, oh, my goodness, I don't know how to say those words. I don't know how to say tube. I don't know how to say extubation. And I was like, what did I just volunteer for? So I pulled the phone out of my back pocket, the one resource that I had, went to an online translator, typed in tube, comes back tubo. All right, guess I can do this. So I looked at the patient, and I was explaining the procedure the best that I could with the knowledge that I knew, the words that were on my vocabulary list, and the words from the online translator. And the little bit that I did know, I was able to help the patient. He didn't swallow all good like he was supposed to, and he was able to go through the procedure really well because I found some courage somewhere and was able to step up and practice what I learned. So I was reflecting on that situation later, and I got to thinking, I learned numbers. I was able to help that lady at the rehab center. I learned sentence structure. I was able to help the man at the hospital. So what if I stepped it up a little bit? So I got all of my friends at the time, who are still great friends today, who are native speakers in Spanish. I said, you got to start talking to me in Spanish so I can get pronunciation down. I can start picking up common phrases because I want to get to conversation level. And I started doing a couple of other things too. I started listening to radio in Spanish, and I started watching Spanish novellas. I was trying to increase my interaction with Spanish as much as I could, because the more I interacted with it, the more confidence I was going to be able to have to use it one day in a real setting. And that brings me to my next story. So I work at the Austin College Admissions Center, which is just across campus here. And one day I was sitting at the front desk, and a family comes in, and they were all speaking Spanish. And so eventually the son came up to the front desk, and he said, hey, I'm a student, and I'm interested in Austin College. Is there any way that I can get a campus tour? And I was like, this is it. This is what I can do. So I ran over to my boss's office, and I said, there's a family here who needs a campus tour in Spanish. Can I do it? And my boss is looking at me like, you can do that? He had no idea that I spoke Spanish or was attempting to. And I had just gotten the campus tour guide job a week ago. So found a lot of confidence and went over to my boss. My boss was like, all right, well, go ahead. So I went back into the lobby with the family, and I said, I'm going to be able to give you a campus tour in Spanish. And they're excited as I am. And so the tour was going great. The family and I were having a great time. And then I hit this big roadblock. We get to the coffee shop here on campus, which is the Kangaroo Coffee Company, where students can use their Kangaroo Hopper dollars, which are like preloaded money for students to buy a coffee at the shop. And because we have all these kangaroo things here because we're the Austin College Kangaroos. So the big problem I had was I don't know the word for kangaroo. And I'm trying to get this family to understand kangaroo, okay? We're the kangaroos. And I'm like, what am I going to do? And so I was forced to describe it. So I looked at the family for help, and I said, okay, this big animal in Australia that jumps up and down, and it has a big tail, and I look crazy because I'm jumping up and down in a coffee shop, and the family and I are laughing uncontrollably, and eventually they got what I was trying to say. But it dawned on me that if that would have happened to me in English, I would have done the same thing. I wouldn't have just stopped communicating. If I didn't know a word, I would have relied on the people around me to help me out, and I would have started describing it so that they could help me figure out what I was trying to say. So all of these moments, I was reflecting on that and the rehab center and the hospital, and I was thinking, okay, I really want to up my ante. So maybe I know the language, but I really want to start appreciating the culture and appreciating the people who speak language. So that's when I booked my trip to Puerto Rico, which was probably the most courage I ever had to take on this journey of learning another language. Because it was my first time traveling alone without my family. I was so out of my comfort zone. I landed in Puerto Rico, and the stop signs weren't even in English. And so everything was so new to me, but I was learning so much because I was interacting with the people and the culture and the language simultaneously. So I was with my class, and we had a Puerto Rican tour guide, so she knew everything about the island, and she was showing us all sorts of things. So we got to see a coffee plantation, and we got to go to a cooking class and make a native Puerto Rican dish, and we were learning all sorts of things that we couldn't have learned in a textbook. And it was helping us appreciate the culture and the people and the countries that speak Spanish. So I remember one day, real specifically, we were walking through Old San Juan, and we were going to dinner that night. And I remember our tour guide pointing out this man in the road who had this giant iguana. And he's just like holding him like a sack of potatoes, just like random guy in the street with an iguana. And I was like, what is this guy doing? And the lady, our tour guide points out, she's like, well, that man is actually like, that's how he makes his living. He like lets people hold his pet. And, that's how he gets a living. And so before I know it, my Spanish teacher is pushing me over there towards the guy with the iguana with some money in my hand, and she's just yelling like, "Put the iguana on your neck." And before I know it, this iguana, in all its glory and all its scales, is on the back of my neck, and I'm freaking out. And it dawned on me that this is where I came full circle. I was interacting with the people and the language and the culture all at once, and I was learning so much. So as we all go on this journey together of learning another language, and it doesn't have to be Spanish, it can be whatever language that you choose. If you only want to learn a little bit of that language, then do that. If you only want to learn numbers, you can do that and still have a meaningful interaction with someone. However, whatever you learn, you have to use it. Because if you know it and you're just sitting on that knowledge, it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't benefit anybody. But the more that you know and the more you're using what you know, the more motivated you will be to learn even more. You're not going to be satisfied with just knowing numbers in another language. You're going to want to know sentence structure, and you're going to want to know how to have a conversation in that language, and it's going to build up your confidence to actually use it in real life. So as we draw here to a close, I want you to think about a language that you want to start speaking, and just do maybe a little bit each day to build up your confidence to start speaking that language with somebody who could benefit from it. So I was interacting with the people and the language and the culture, and all of that combined was helping me see the value of Spanish and appreciate everything so much more. And interacting with the people and the language and the culture is what makes our world more connected and more unified. And that, I think, is an idea worth spreading. Thank you.